The shadow, in Carl Jung's thinking, is a concept that carries a frightening, almost visceral depth. It's not just a psychological term, it is a distorted mirror that reflects everything we avoid facing in ourselves. From an early age, we are shaped by social, family, and cultural norms that teach us what is right, acceptable, and desirable. In this process, we learn to hide what doesn't fit, to repress emotions and traits that could expose us to judgment or rejection. The anger you swallowed as a child, the pride you called ugly, the ambition you called selfishness, all of this has not disappeared. It is there in the shadow, waiting for the moment to emerge. Imagine a child who loves to draw, but is constantly told that it won't get them anywhere, that it's a waste of time. This repressed passion is not forgotten. It turns into a discomfort that silently accompanies it. Perhaps, in adulthood, this same person finds themselves irritated by successful artists or friends who pursue creative careers. This frustration, apparently directed at the other, is in fact an echo of what she repressed within herself. The shadow manifests itself like this, like an insistent whisper that leads us to project our unfulfilled desires and our denied failures onto others. But the shadow is not just made up of negative traits. Many of its repressed elements carry extraordinary potential. Anger, for example, can hide an inner strength that, if recognized, would help establish healthy boundaries. Pride can be the embryo of robust self-confidence. Even feelings like envy can point to aspirations we ignore. However, without shadow consciousness, these energies become saboteurs, operating deep within the unconscious. Jung believed that ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. On the contrary, it makes it even more powerful. What is not integrated infiltrates our lives in subtle ways, controlling decisions, shaping relationships, and influencing behavior. Think about how many times you've reacted disproportionately to something small, like a casual comment from a friend or criticism at work. These intense reactions are often the shadow manifesting itself, seeking to be seen, recognized, welcomed. Interestingly, the shadow is not just individual. Jung also identified the concept of collective shadow, a kind of accumulation of the repressed aspects of a society or group. In a culture that values productivity above all else, for example, people may suppress needs like rest, vulnerability, or creativity. This can lead to a widespread feeling of dissatisfaction, where no one seems to understand why life seems so devoid of meaning. This collective disconnection, like the individual shadow, demands attention and integration. Shadow work begins when we admit its existence. It is a moment of courage, as it means accepting that we are not just the ideal image that we project to the world. It means facing truths that can be uncomfortable, but also liberating. When we deny the shadow, we become prisoners of it. But when we recognize it, we gain a key to unlock our dormant potential. Consider this. There are stories that touch on the theme of shadow in an almost universal way, like the classic The Doctor and the Beast by Robert Louis Stevenson. The figure of Dr. Jekyll, a respectable man who tries to separate his morality from his dark impulses by creating the alter ego Mr. Hyde, is a powerful metaphor for what happens when we deny our hidden sides. The attempt to eliminate the shadow, instead of integrating it, leads to ruin. This narrative resonates because we all, at some level, face this internal battle. Another example can be found in ancient mythologies. Loki, in Norse mythology, is often portrayed as a trickster, one who causes chaos and confusion. Although his behavior is undesirable, he is also the force that drives significant change, challenging the status quo and forcing the gods to confront their own flaws. Loki, like the shadow, is the agent of transformation, but only if he is understood and faced honestly. For many people, beginning to explore the shadow can seem like an intimidating, almost impossible task. After all, who wants to revisit painful moments or face parts of themselves that have been under lock and key for so long? However, it is precisely in this exploration that we find true strength. As Jung said, there is no awakening of consciousness without pain. The pain of recognizing our repressed aspects is the price of deeper emotional freedom. As we observe our daily reactions, we can begin to glimpse the outlines of our shadow. Irritation at a colleague who seems too conceited can reveal an ambition that we have stifled. Admiration for someone who lives fearlessly may indicate a desire for authenticity that we ignore. These signs, if interpreted correctly, are like a map to our fullest selves. Recognizing the shadow is not just about identifying flaws or weaknesses. It's about embracing the complexity of who we are. Ultimately, the shadow is not our enemy. It is a part of us that carries a promise of transformation, of growth, of plenitude. It is the bridge between who we are and what we can become. But how to take the first step on this path, how to turn discomfort into opportunity, therein lies the key to integrating the shadow into our consciousness, a process we will explore more deeply in the next step. Get ready to discover how this inner work can reveal hidden strengths and open doors you never knew existed. The shadow exerts its influence in subtle but powerful ways, infiltrating every area of our lives. Even without consciously noticing it, it shapes our reactions, our decisions, and even the way we see the world. When repressed aspects of our personality are not recognized, they find ways to express themselves, often in distorted ways. It's as if, by trying to avoid the shadow, we end up allowing it to take control in the background. One of the most common ways in which the shadow manifests itself is through the phenomenon of projection. When we don't recognize certain aspects in ourselves, we tend to see them in others. Imagine, for example, that you are a person who always seeks to please others, avoiding conflicts at any cost. This trait may be something you value, but at the same time, it also represses the desire to assert yourself, to say no when necessary. In this case, you may feel exaggerated irritation with someone who is assertive, confusing this characteristic with arrogance or insensitivity. In reality, what is bothering you is not the person themselves, but the reflection of something that you deny in yourself. This projection can generate significant tension in relationships. How many times have we judged someone harshly without realizing that we were actually dealing with repressed parts of our own personality? Carl Jung believed that when we project our shadow onto others, we not only miss opportunities for self-knowledge, but we also distort the way we connect with those around us. We create invisible barriers based on distorted perceptions, and we distance ourselves from both others and ourselves. Furthermore, shadow can directly interfere with our choices. For example, a person who represses their vulnerability may avoid deep relationships, fearing feeling exposed. Someone who denies their own ambition may sabotage growth opportunities, unconsciously convinced that they do not deserve success. These behaviors often repeat themselves, creating patterns that further reinforce the shadow's influence. The feeling of being trapped in a cycle that we cannot break is often a clear sign that the shadow is in charge. A powerful example of this can be found in the idea of emotional triggers. These triggers are situations or behaviors that provoke an intense, sometimes even disproportionate reaction. Imagine that you are in a work meeting and a colleague makes a seemingly harmless comment, but it arouses great irritation in you. This overreaction may indicate that something in the interaction tapped into a repressed part of your shadow self, perhaps an insecurity or a feeling of inadequacy that you try to hide. Rather than being a threat, this discomfort can be an opportunity for exploration and growth if you have the courage to question why you reacted the way you did. But the shadow doesn't just influence our individual emotions, it also shapes the dynamics of groups and entire societies. Jung called this the collective shadow, a phenomenon that occurs when aspects repressed by a culture or community manifest themselves in a widespread way. For example, in societies that extol material success above all else, there may be a tendency to repress emotions such as compassion or empathy, treating them as signs of weakness. This creates a collective imbalance where the incessant search for achievement often results in alienation, loneliness, and widespread dissatisfaction. Interestingly, the collective shadow also manifests itself in historical and social events. Think about cultural movements that over time have emerged to challenge rigid norms, such as artistic movements or social revolutions. These moments of rupture often reflect the attempt to integrate aspects of the shadow that have been neglected for generations. Just as in the individual, the collective shadow seeks expression, often in unpredictable and intense ways. The impact of the shadow on our lives is therefore both personal and universal. She can keep us away from our goals, sabotage our relationships, and prevent us from living fully. But paradoxically, it is precisely this force that pushes us to seek self-knowledge. Intense emotions, triggers, and repetitive patterns are not signs of weakness, but rather invitations to take a closer look at what is hidden. If the shadow has the power to influence our lives in such profound ways, how can we begin to face it? How to transform projection, triggers, and unconscious cycles into opportunities for integration and growth. In the next step, we will explore the path to bringing these aspects to the light of consciousness, beginning a process that, although challenging, promises to reveal surprising inner strength. The journey is just beginning. Integrating the shadow into our consciousness is like turning on a light in a dark room that we have avoided for years. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. The environment is strange, disorganized, perhaps even scary. But over time we realize that by shining a light on what was hidden, we begin to find valuable objects, forgotten pieces of ourselves that have the power to transform us. The first step in this process is to recognize that we all have a shadow. This may seem obvious, but we often deny this reality. After all, no one likes to admit their imperfections or face what society has taught them to consider as bad. However, ignoring these aspects only gives them more power. As Jung said, "Until you become aware of the unconscious, it will direct your life and you will call it destiny." This is the starting point, accepting that there is something inside us that needs to be explored. But how to start? One of the most accessible paths is to observe our everyday emotions and reactions. Intense emotions, especially those that seem disproportionate to the circumstances, are often signs that something deeper is being activated. For example, imagine that you feel immense anger when you see someone making decisions that seem impulsive. This feeling may be an indication that you suppress your own ability to take risks or be spontaneous. Emotions are like an emotional GPS, pointing directly to the shadow aspects that are asking to be acknowledged. Another powerful method for integrating the shadow is the practice of self-reflection. Writing in a journal, for example, can be an effective way to access these hidden aspects. Instead of just recording the day's events, try exploring the emotions associated with them. Ask yourself, why did this bother me so much? What does this situation reveal about me? By doing this, you begin to identify recurring patterns and themes. You may notice that the same emotion appears in different contexts, which may indicate the presence of something repressed. In addition to introspective practices, stories and myths can be extraordinary tools for understanding the shadow. Ancient and modern narratives often explore the human struggle with the hidden side of the psyche. Think of classic tales, like Narcissus, who falls in love with his own reflection, unable to see beyond the surface. This story is a powerful metaphor for the difficulty of integrating the shadow. We become trapped in the image we project to the world, ignoring what is hidden beneath it. Reflecting on these myths can help us identify parallels in our own lives and see the shadow in a new light. Additionally, observing the qualities we admire in others can also be revealing. Many times, admiration is the other side of projection. Just as we project repressed aspects onto ourselves that we reject, we also project positive qualities that we fail to recognize. For example, If you admire someone for their courage, you may be ignoring your own ability to face challenges. This practice of observing and reflecting on the qualities we value in others helps us see our hidden potential. Shadow integration is neither a quick nor an easy process. It involves an ongoing dialogue with ourselves, a willingness to face discomfort, and the humility to admit that we are not perfect. But the reward is priceless. Each integrated aspect makes us more whole, more authentic, more human. Shadow work allows us to reclaim parts of ourselves that have been lost, transforming what was once a burden into a source of strength. But what do we do when we encounter something truly uncomfortable? How to deal with emotions such as shame, guilt, or anger, which may emerge during this process? These feelings, often considered negative, are actually valuable guides that point to the areas most in need of attention. In the next step, we will explore how to work with these emotions to use them as catalysts for even deeper growth. After all, what's in the dark only seems scary until let us face it. The benefits of integrating shadow go far beyond what we imagine. Although the process is challenging and at times uncomfortable, the results are transformative. When we face and accept the parts of ourselves that we have repressed, we unlock a latent force that can profoundly change our lives. It's like opening a forgotten chest, full of treasures that were left behind amidst layers of dust and fear. The first and most obvious benefit is self-knowledge. By integrating the shadow, we begin to see ourselves more clearly. We are no longer just the persona we project to the world, that mask we wear to appear likable, competent, or morally impeccable. We become complete with our lights and shadows, with our talents and imperfections. This gives us a feeling of authenticity, a relief that we no longer need to hide who we really are. Imagine someone who has always suppressed their anger, believing that expressing it would be inappropriate or harmful. This person, by integrating their shadow, may discover that anger is not just destructive. It is also a force that can motivate change, set healthy boundaries, and protect what's important. By recognizing and channeling this energy in a constructive way, she becomes a more balanced person and capable of facing challenges with firmness and compassion. Another significant benefit is emotional resilience. When we accept our dark aspects, we become less vulnerable to external criticism or challenging circumstances. This happens because we no longer need to defend ourselves from the parts of ourselves that we previously denied. For example, a person who has integrated their vulnerability is less affected by moments of weakness or exposure because they have already accepted that these experiences are part of being human. This acceptance gives us emotional stability and allows us to navigate life's adversities with more serenity. Furthermore, integrating the shadow helps us improve our relationships. When we no longer project our repressed aspects onto others, we are able to see people more clearly and authentically. This reduces automatic judgments and unnecessary tension, allowing for deeper, more meaningful connections. For example, by integrating one's own tendency toward perfectionism, a person can stop constantly criticizing the mistakes of others and instead offer genuine support. This change creates a space for healthier and truer relationships. The shadow also holds untapped talents and potential. Often, what we repress is not just negative. They are skills, passions, or characteristics that we learned to hide because we believed they were not valued or acceptable. A person who has always suppressed their creativity, for example, may discover enormous artistic or innovative potential when working with their shadow. These gifts, once integrated, can enrich life in unexpected ways, bringing a sense of fulfillment and purpose. Interestingly, shadow integration also helps us find internal balance. Instead of living in extremes, being overly controlling or completely passive, for example, we learn to harmonize our opposites. Jung described this state as individuation, a process in which we become whole by uniting all parts of our psyche. This balance allows us to live in a more conscious and aligned way, making choices that reflect our true selves. Ultimately, perhaps the biggest benefit of integrating shadow is the freedom it provides. When we stop fighting ourselves, we free ourselves from automatic patterns of behavior and repressed emotions that silently control us. This gives us a new perspective on life, allowing us to move more lightly and authentically. The freedom to be who we really are without masks or fears is a profoundly transformative experience. But like any growth process, integrating the shadow requires continuous work. It is not something that happens all at once or can be completed quickly. In the next step, we will explore how to take the first steps along this path, with practices that help bring these aspects to consciousness and begin the integration process. After all, every small advance on this journey brings us closer to a richer, more balanced and truer life. The shadow holds both our greatest fears and our greatest potentials, and it's up to us to discover what's waiting to emerge. Starting to work with the shadow is, at the same time, an act of courage and a commitment to self-knowledge. It is not a path that can be taken hastily or superficially. It requires patience, attention, and above all, a willingness to face discomfort. But as in every transformative journey, the first steps are fundamental. They prepare us for what's to come and give us a solid foundation to continue exploring. The most accessible starting point is observing our emotions and reactions in everyday life. Carl Jung said that the shadow reveals itself in intense emotions, especially those that arise in apparently simple situations. For example, think of a time when you felt uncomfortable or angry with someone. What exactly generated this reaction? Was it the person's tone of voice, your attitude? Often, what irritates us in others is a reflection of what we repress in ourselves. This kind of self-questioning may feel uncomfortable at first, but it is one of the most effective ways to begin to identify the contours of the shadow. Another essential step is the practice of self-reflection. A powerful tool in this process is the use of a diary. Writing about your emotions, triggers, and experiences not only helps you release what's stuck, but it also creates a record that allows you to identify patterns over time. For example, as you repeatedly recount situations in which you felt undervalued, you may notice that there is a recurring theme related to your need for validation. This discovery, in itself, is a significant advance in shadow work. In addition to recording your emotions, it is important to ask specific questions during reflection. Why did this situation bother me so much? What is this emotion trying to show me? Is there something about myself that I'm avoiding accepting? These questions help direct your focus to what really matters and prevent you from getting lost in superficialities. It's not about judging or criticizing yourself, but about observing with curiosity and openness. Meditation can also be a powerful ally in this process. By teaching us to observe our thoughts and emotions without judging them, meditation creates a safe space for the shadow to begin to emerge. During a meditative practice, you might simply ask yourself, what part of myself am I avoiding seeing? Or, what is my mind trying to hide from me? These questions, asked in a state of calm and mindfulness, can yield surprising insights. For those who prefer a more practical approach, an interesting way to explore the shadow is to pay attention to the moments when you feel jealous or admiration for someone. These feelings, although often ignored or misinterpreted, are valuable clues. Envy, for example, can reveal repressed desires or qualities that you would like to develop in yourself. Admiration, in turn, can point to talents or characteristics that you possess but have not yet fully recognized. Another creative approach to working with the shadow is to explore stories and myths that resonate with you. As we mentioned earlier, narratives like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or myths from ancient cultures, often address the struggle with dark aspects of the psyche. Choose a story that has an emotional impact on you and reflect on why it is so memorable. What aspects of the dark or heroic character reflect something in your own experience? Seeing your shadow through the lens of a narrative can make it less threatening and more relatable. Finally, it is important to remember that working with shadow is an ongoing process. There is no end to this journey, as we are constantly growing and transforming. Starting small is the best approach. Take a few minutes a day to observe your emotions, reflect on your reactions, or write about your experiences. Little by little, you will develop a familiarity with your shadow and begin to integrate your repressed aspects. In the next step, we'll explore the most common challenges in this process and how to overcome them. After all, facing the shadow can bring up intense emotions and resistances that, if not understood, can lead us astray. Knowing how to deal with these difficulties is just as important as getting started, and that's exactly what we're going to unveil next. The journey is challenging, but the fruits it offers are extraordinary. Working with the shadow is, without a doubt, one of the most challenging processes of self-knowledge, not because it's technically difficult, but because it requires direct confrontation with parts of ourselves that we spend our lives trying to avoid. These parts carry not only characteristics we reject, but also intense emotions like guilt, shame, and fear. Facing these emotions is like traversing unfamiliar terrain. It's uncomfortable, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply painful. But it is also the only path to true integration and growth. One of the first challenges that arise when working with the shadow is resistance. The mind, used to avoiding discomfort, finds countless ways to divert our attention. There may be a sudden desire to abandon the process, rationalizations that minimize its importance, or even an increase in internal judgment. Your resistance is not a sign of failure, but rather evidence that you are getting closer to something meaningful. The shadow, after all, does not want to be confronted. It was created precisely to be hidden. Recognizing this resistance as a natural part of the process is an essential step towards overcoming it. Another common obstacle is the emotional intensity that shadow work can trigger. When we begin to explore repressed parts of our psyche, long-ignored feelings can emerge with full force. For example, when you recognize a repressed tendency toward anger, you may experience outbursts of that emotion in unexpected situations. This release can be scary, but it is a necessary stage for these emotions to be understood and integrated. Instead of trying to suppress them again, the ideal is to welcome them with curiosity and compassion. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to show me? Or, where does she come from? Shame is another significant barrier on this path. When working with the shadow, we often come across aspects of ourselves that we find unacceptable. Maybe it's a desire we consider selfish, a behavior that shames us, or a trait we learn to disavow. Shame can be paralyzing, but it is also a valuable indicator. It points exactly to the parts of our shadow that need the most attention. To overcome shame, it's essential to approach it with kindness. Remember that everyone has a shadow, and that confronting it is an act of courage, not weakness. In addition to the intense emotions, there is the challenge of confusion. Oftentimes, shadow aspects are so deeply repressed that they can seem inaccessible or difficult to identify. You may wonder, how do I know what I'm repressing if I can't even recognize it? This is a legitimate question, and the answer lies in paying attention to subtle clues. Disproportionate emotions, projections onto others, and repetitive patterns of behavior are clear indicators that the shadow is at work. Over time, these clues become easier to interpret, and what once seemed obscure begins to take shape. The fear of judgment, whether from oneself or others, is also a recurring challenge. Working with the shadow can bring to light issues that contradict the image you have built of yourself or that you fear exposing to the world. Maybe you prided yourself on being a calm person, and when you confront your shadow, you discover an aggressive side that you never admitted to. This shock can shake your identity, but it is also an opportunity to build a more authentic and complete image of who you are. An effective way to overcome these challenges is to cultivate self-compassion. Instead of judging what emerges from the shadows, Try to approach it with the same empathy you would offer a dear friend. Practice phrases like, "It's natural to feel this way," "I'm learning and growing," or "It's okay to have imperfections." Self-compassion not only softens the impact of intense emotions, but also creates a safe space for the shadow to be explored without fear. Another powerful resource is external support. Working with shadow doesn't mean you have to do it alone. A trusted therapist or mentor can help interpret the emotions that arise, offer a neutral perspective, and guide you through the most difficult times. Talking to friends or support groups who are also exploring their shadows can reinforce a sense of connection and normalcy during the process. Remember, above all, that shadow work is a gradual path. Don't try to tackle everything at once or expect immediate results. Every small advance, every integrated insight or emotion is a significant step towards transformation. As you continue, you will find that the initial discomfort gives way to a feeling of freedom and empowerment. But if shadow work presents so many challenges, why insist on it? Because the rewards far outweigh the difficulties. In the next step, we'll explore these rewards, from strengthening self-confidence to unlocking hidden talents. After all, it is in the darkness of the shadow that the seeds of our greatest potential lie. Crossing this terrain can be difficult, but what you find on the other side will be truly transformative. The rewards of working with the shadow are immense and often surprising. As we become willing to explore the repressed aspects of our psyche, we begin to discover something extraordinary. What once seemed dark, scary, or shameful holds untapped potential. Integrating the shadow not only frees us from the unconscious influences that silently shape our lives, but also provides us with a deeper connection to ourselves and the world around us. One of the first rewards that emerge is the strengthening of self-confidence. When we know and integrate our shadows, we become less vulnerable to external criticism and internal insecurities. This is because we no longer need to hide or fight parts of ourselves. Imagine someone who suppressed a creative side for years because they believed it would be useless or childish. By working with the shadow and rescuing this aspect, this person can feel more whole and consequently more secure in their identity. The trust that comes from this integration is solid because it is based on a genuine acceptance of who we are. Another significant reward is freedom from destructive or repetitive behavior patterns. How many times have you found yourself trapped in cycles that seemed impossible to break? Maybe it's the tendency to engage in relationships that end painfully, or the repetition of professional sabotage that impedes your progress. These patterns are often manifestations of the shadow, trying to get your attention. By integrating the repressed aspects that fuel you, you gain the freedom to choose new paths, more aligned with your true self. The shadow also holds talents and skills that have been forgotten or neglected. Jung reminds us that we not only repress negative traits, but also those that society or our experiences have taught us to despise. Perhaps at some point you hid your courage for fear of appearing aggressive, or stifled your sensitivity because you believed it would be interpreted as weakness. Working with the shadow allows you to recover these qualities and use them in a balanced way. A person who has always avoided showing their vulnerability, for example, may discover that this same vulnerability is the key to building deeper, more authentic connections. Furthermore, integrating the shadow promotes a profound transformation in our relationships. When we stop projecting our shadows onto others, we begin to see people as they really are, and not as reflections of our own internal issues. This reduces automatic judgments, unnecessary tensions and conflicts based on misunderstandings. For example, someone who has always felt a dislike for assertive colleagues may realize, when integrating their own need for assertiveness, that the problem was not with others, but with themselves. This change in perspective creates space for more harmonious and genuine relationships. Another notable benefit is increased creativity and intuition. Many repressed aspects of the shadow are linked to our ability to imagine, create, and intuit. When these parts are integrated, they become sources of inspiration. Great artists, writers, and thinkers have often derived their genius from exploring their own shadows. By embracing our inner contradictions, we become freer to experiment, innovate, and express ourselves in authentic and powerful ways. Shadow integration also brings a deep sense of inner balance. Instead of living at the mercy of extremes, such as being excessively rigid or completely permissive, controlled or impulsive, we learn to harmonize our polarities. This balance allows us to make more conscious decisions and act in a way that is more aligned with our values. It is the basis of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a complete being, uniting all aspects of the psyche into an integrated whole. Ultimately, perhaps the most profound reward of shadow work is emotional freedom. By facing what we have avoided for so long, we free ourselves from the weight of the masks we wear to appear perfect or to please others. We no longer need to hide our flaws or pretend to be something we are not. This freedom allows us to live more authentically, making choices based on who we really are, not fear or the need for approval. This journey, although challenging, leads us to a state of greater self-understanding and acceptance. It's like looking into a mirror that, for the first time, reflects our true self, not just the parts we find beautiful or acceptable, but all of who we are. This recognition allows us to live with more purpose, depth, and connection. However, to reap these rewards, you must continue the work. Integrating the shadow is not an isolated event, but an ongoing process of exploration and growth. In the next step, we will see how to maintain this commitment over time, with practices that help strengthen awareness and keep transformation alive. After all, what we begin by exploring the shadow does not end with a single insight. It is a journey that accompanies us throughout our lives, revealing new possibilities at every step. Working with the shadow is not a task that can be completed once and for all. It is a continuous, almost cyclical process that accompanies us throughout our lives. With each new experience, with each challenge faced once awakened, the shadow can reveal new aspects of itself, inviting us to a deeper understanding of who we are. Integrating these hidden parts is ultimately a path to wholeness, but it requires commitment and consistent practices that help us keep this internal dialogue alive. One of the most effective methods for continuing this work is to cultivate mindfulness. Practices such as meditation or taking breaks during the day can help you observe the thoughts and emotions that arise without judging them. This creates a space of awareness, allowing the shadow parts to reveal themselves more clearly. For example, when you feel an intense emotion such as anger or sadness, you might stop and ask, "Where is this coming from? What is this trying to show me about myself?" Over time, this practice becomes a powerful tool for identifying unconscious patterns that previously went unnoticed. Another valuable approach is to keep a journal. Writing about your experiences, emotions, and reflections creates an ongoing record that allows you to revisit your own thoughts and recognize recurring themes. Take a few minutes a day to write down times when you felt discomfort, judgment, or reactivity. As you reread these entries over time, you will notice patterns that point to aspects of the shadow that need to be explored. This practice not only illuminates the unconscious, but also provides a safe space for you to process what you discover without rushing or pressure. In addition to introspective practices, revisiting stories, myths, and narratives that resonate with you can help keep shadow work relevant and dynamic. Ancient myths, such as Hercules facing the 12 labors, or modern stories, such as the hero's journey in films, often reflect internal struggles that we also experience. Reflecting on these narratives can bring new insights and perspectives into how your shadow is manifesting right now. Ask yourself, Which character in this story do I most identify with? What does this tell me about the parts of myself that are still hidden? Another important aspect of continuing to work with the shadow is learning to deal with the moments of resistance that will inevitably arise. Sometimes you may feel like you no longer want to explore certain emotions or traits, or that you've worked through them enough. This resistance is natural, but it should not be a reason to abandon the process. Instead, view these moments as a much-needed break, allowing yourself to rest before diving deeper. There is no rush to integrate your shadow. The important thing is to remain committed to returning to work when you are ready. External support can also be a valuable resource on this journey. An experienced therapist or mentor can help you identify aspects of your shadow that you might not notice on your own, as well as provide a safe space to process difficult emotions. Support groups or communities that share this same path can reinforce the feeling of connection and help normalize the challenges of the process. Sharing your experiences and hearing other people's stories can be an enriching way to keep shadow work alive and meaningful. Over time, you will realize that shadow work is not just a process of healing or personal growth, but also a way of living more fully and consciously. Small daily practices, such as reflecting on the qualities you admire or judge in others, or even paying attention to the emotions that arise in everyday interactions, can become natural habits. Each of these practices keeps the internal dialogue active, allowing new insights and transformations to continue to emerge. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this ongoing work is the feeling of freedom it brings. Over time, you begin to realize that you no longer need to fear or avoid parts of yourself. What once seemed dark and threatening becomes familiar, even welcoming. The shadow stops being an adversary and becomes an ally, a source of strength, creativity, and wisdom. However, it is important to remember that shadow work is not about achieving an end state of perfection. Jung reminds us that individuation, the process of integrating all parts of ourselves, is a journey, not a destination. Each layer we uncover leads us to another, revealing more about who we are and what we can become. And it is precisely in this continuity that the beauty of this process lies. There is always something new to discover, something deeper to explore. As you move forward on this journey, ask yourself, how can I live more authentically today? What does my shadow still have to teach me? These questions keep the path open, allowing shadow work to become a natural and enriching part of your life. Because in the end, it's not about just to integrate what is hidden, but to live fully, with light, with shadow, with everything that you are.